going to call the Thursday, June 13th regular meeting of the Planning Commission to order. And we will get started with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have a full Planning Commission today, so welcome to our District 1 Planning Commissioner, Trent Fiorino, who has been following along with the general plan hearings. Peter, do we have any agenda changes?
No agenda changes, just a note that we are probably not going to go into closed session today, but it's on the agenda in the event that we need to for any reason.
We do want to report that we did have a closed session at the end of our last Planning Commission meeting on whatever date that was.
June 7th.
June 7th, thank you, Friday, I believe. And we had a conference with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation, one case pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D2, and no action was taken. And now is the public's opportunity to address the Planning Commission on land use issues not on the agenda. 5 minutes per person, 15 minutes per topic. We won't be taking any action on items presented under public comments.
May I ask a question? I'm not sure if our new commissioner's been sworn in or not.
He has.
Oh, great.
I checked on that earlier.
Yes,
He is
I have.
official.
Fully local.
I just make a brief statement. Just a brief statement. I wanted to say that I'm proud to be here representing District 1. And I know there were some questions about District 1 that came up not being represented on the Planning Commission, but I want to let you know I have watched and attended all the meetings that have to do with the general plan. And the last meeting on Friday I wasn't able to attend, but I watched that on video, and I did learn something very important. Watching that, and that's to mute your cell phone. So my cell phone is muted.
Thank you. Any public comments?
I'm Will Moore, District 5, branch of Calaveras, and this is for Supervisor
Fiorino.
The other members already have copies of this.
Anyhow, this is about a resource. This county has a resource. The resource is hardwood. I'm a member of the Hardwood Advisory Committee. And this is a recommendation that we develop this resource. So I lived in Alaska in a fishing town. And the resource there was fish. But in order to develop that resource, they had to have infrastructure. There was a boat harbor and a cannery. So the cannery was a private enterprise. Whitney Fidalgo Fish Company built a fish house there. But the government built the boat harbor. If the government hadn't built the boat harbor, Whitney Fidalgo wouldn't have built the fish house. The fishermen wouldn't have been able to bring in their fish. And there's a similar situation developing here with this resource. In order for crews to cut any of this hardwood out of the forest, they have to have a place to go with it. Well, the place to go has to be a charcoal plant. This stuff has to be reduced to gas and charcoal before it can be marketed. So that's going to require some input from the county. I don't have a specific proposal at this point, but I worked in the early phases of BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, back when it was just an idea. And it had been an idea in circulation, in public discussion among governments and enterprises and so forth for years before the first stake was put in the ground. I was working on preliminary route surveys before any rail was laid and so forth. So what I'm trying to do here is get the conversation started in the public and in these institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda, of which there is none. And we will go ahead and get started on our public hearings. You want me to read this, Peter? Our first public hearing is 2018-016 tentative parcel map for James Whitaker. So we are opening the public hearing for that, and we'll begin with acknowledgement of has there been any further correspondence received?
No, there is not.
Thanks, Scott. And we'll go ahead and take the staff report.
As you said, this is tentative parcel map 2018-016 for James Whitaker. This project is located at 400 Church Street in Murphys. The applicant is requesting approval of a tentative parcel map to divide a single parcel into 2 lots. The 0.77 acre parcel is zoned R1 10,000, which means single family residential 10,000 square foot minimum for new parcels. The current general plan has the parcel in the Murphy-Douglas Flat Community Plan, which designates the land use as single family residential 4 units per acre. The parcel map proposes to divide the parcel into 2 lots, 0.23 acre parcel A and 0.54 acre parcel B. No change of zoning is being requested at this time. Here's a look at the property. We'll get back to that. First, we'll look at the historic use of the property. The house on the property was the site of the historic schoolhouse, which was converted into a caretaker residence by the Veterans District. The site is also the location of the former Murphy's Community Pool, which includes a paved parking lot, an in-ground swimming pool, a concrete block building, and 2 small storage sheds. The parking lot of the property was used to serve the pool as well as for public parking for businesses on Main Street, 1 block to the south. A cultural resource study was conducted by Foothill Resources Ltd. in 2018 to determine the significance of any historic or cultural resource on the site, including the pool. The report determined that the community pool was not significant as a historic resource and no other historic or cultural resources were observed. As for current use, the caretaker's residence has since been remodeled and is currently being used as a vacation rental home. The pool is currently closed and the parking lot has been closed to the public since the property was purchased in 2014 from the Veterans Memorial District. As there is no parking agreement recorded to the title, the owners of the property are not obligated to continue to allow public use of the lot. Here is the aerial image of the parcel again. The tentative map has the parcel oriented sideways to maximize space on the page. So we'll just do that real quick to get a better orientation of what's going on. Here is the proposed map. I kind of overlaid the aerial underneath it so you can get a better idea of how it is. But before I get too far into this, remember that these visuals are just an idea of where these lines are. Due to the nature of mapping, it's basically impossible to see exactly where lot lines are in reality. For example, the county GIS shows the western property line to be this line. The fence line in the aerial photo, though, is right here. And the parcel map shows the line being here. Yeah. In reality, the line's probably in some other 4th spot.
Welcome to Murphy.
Right. So just keep that in mind. Any issues regarding the true location of that line will not be affected by this project, as the only line that is being modified in this project is a new line to create a new parcel. So getting to these new parcels, Proposed parcel A contains the single-family dwelling currently being used as a vacation rental home and a portion of the parking lot. Proposed parcel B is the site of the former Murphy's Community Pool and is developed with a concrete block changing room, an in-ground swimming pool, and 2 small storage sheds. Parcel B also contains the majority of the parking lot. Access to both parcels will be off Church Street via existing encroachments. An existing driveway along the western property line will be incorporated into the proposed parcel B. And proposed parcel A will gain access from its current frontage, which is Church Street. An existing access to proposed parcel B from Surrey Lane through the neighboring Masonic Hall property will not be used and is currently blocked. The parcel is served by Murphy's Sanitary District as well as the Union Public Utility District. Neither district had any requirements for approval of the project. As far as CEQA is concerned, pursuant to CEQA guidelines, county staff had prepared an initial study negative declaration. The initial study was distributed for the 30-day review and comment period between January 30th and March 2nd of this year. One comment letter from the general public was received from David and Diane Trent, who are neighboring property owners to the west. In their letter, the Trents voiced their concerns regarding access and traffic generation, especially if the new parcel were to be used for commercial purposes. Public Works has determined that one additional R1 parcel has the potential to generate approximately 10 additional daily trips. This amount of new traffic will not impact the current level of service of Church Street. No access or road improvements have been required by Public Works as part of the approvals for this project. With the current zoning, commercial uses would require a use permit or a zoning amendment, at which time any possible effects of such a project, including traffic, would be evaluated through the secret review process. At this time, only the R1 permitted by right uses are being considered when evaluating the impacts. It is staff's determination that the comments provided didn't warrant revisions to the CEQA document or modify significance levels for the impact areas discussed. To conclude, the proposed tentative parcel map to divide the subject property into 2 parcels is consistent with the current county general plan, the county zoning ordinance. The proposed project is in conformance with current uses and density in the surrounding area, and through the secret review process, project-related impacts were found to be less than significant. It is staff's recommendation that the Planning Commission adopt Resolution 2019-013, adopting the negative declaration and approving the tentative parcel map based upon the findings contained therein. Any questions?
None for me.
Any questions? Is the applicant here? Would you like to say anything?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say is I appreciate the process that Scott worked on. And when we first purchased the property, it's a family purchase, and 3 sisters and their significant others are involved. And to get us together in the beginning was like herding cats. And after 4 years, we've decided that it's time to, some of us go a different direction. So with doing the subdivision, it'll allow part of the parties to keep the front building for the vacation rental, and to sell the back property to fund the buyout of the other parties. And part of the thinking here is we weren't going to do anything with the back parcel at all, so we think it's a good idea for the town to have use of that property for new residents. So we hope you approve. Thank
Any
you.
questions?
No.
Thank you. Does any member of the public have anything to say about this?
I just have a...
Come on up to the microphone.
My name's Dave Trent, and I'm the property to the west, and I saw your graph there with, I guess, 3 or 4 different lines dividing the 2 properties. Am I to understand correctly that the line that is there now with the fence and with the mature shrubs is the line?
The line is wherever the surveyor says it is.
And where is that?
It's not being changed by this application.
paid for a survey, I can provide that to you.
Pardon me?
We paid for a survey that I can provide for you to get the exact locations of the lines.
Right, well, we know what the survey, or in fact, I talked to your surveyors when they were out there. I had it surveyed myself
Excuse me?
in
Can
'03.
you address the commission
Sorry.
just for a minute, and then we'll give you a chance?
My only question,
This actually isn't part of the action that's being proposed here today, because they're proposing to split the parcel with no change to that boundary line. So that is actually something you need to resolve between the two of you. Go ahead and get that line marked so that you can.
well, my question is, what is that line? I saw 4.
We don't know. Would you like to respond, Scott?
So the line that exists is wherever the surveyor has pointed out to be. But the thing is, because of the nature of lines, especially in places like Murphy's, you have surveyed lines, you have where people built fences and planted things, you have where people paved things, and when people do things like that, they just kind of go on where they assume a line to be. Like when I built my fence, I just built it where the old fence was. I didn't do a survey to see exactly if that was the line. And the same thing happens here. And unfortunately, oftentimes over time, where those lines are gets muddled. And
Scott, could you pop that back up?
Yeah.
That view.
I have too many animations, hold on. So, as my presentation is showing, is that because of the way mapping is, we're trying to put a 3-dimensional surface onto 2 dimensions with multiple layers trying to match them all up. A aerial photo with a parcel lines on top of it and survey lines on top of that, it's hard to tell on a map where where the line really is. That's why I have the multiple lines up here.
I think what he's saying is the recorded property description is the line.
Yeah, so if you
But
look,
the lines that you see on the ground visually when you're out there may not exactly match. And if you look at the GIS map, it's not an exact match either.
correct.
So,
And if you look at the parcel map here, there are pins marked, and wherever those pins are on the ground is where you draw the lines to. Our maps are just attempts to.
Can I just briefly interrupt for a second? I just wanted to clarify, finding out where the exact line is not relevant to the action being proposed today, because those lines are not, wherever they happen to be, are not proposed to change. Is that correct?
That's
Okay.
correct. And what I was going to recommend that if the neighbors get together and look, identify where the surveyed boundary markers are, and that's where the line is officially, where it's been since that lot was created, who knows how long ago. If there is an agreement between property owners, say, well, we want to make it where the fence line is, and everyone says that's possible, then there is a lot line adjustment procedure you can go through to modify that boundary. But that, again, is not before us today. The only thing that's before us is the creation of the new parcel in the, because that's the southeast corner of the property.
Okay, the reason I'm even bringing this up is not the fact that the line is 1 or 2 feet one way or the other. It's just, it's kind of a buffer lot for us around the property that we live in, which is one more property to the west. The issue is that our driveway goes down the property line, and it services a cottage in the back, and the cottage was built in 1944. So the only way we can get back there is to go down that driveway. At this point, we are looking at the whole situation as a win-win situation. It's a win situation for the rental in front, because they don't, when they rent the property, have to look at all of our yard and what's going on there and the trash bucket that's there and et cetera, et cetera. For us, it gives us a little bit of privacy from them. So when sometimes renters get a little loud or there's a little bit more going on than just normal conversation next door, we have a buffer.
Sir.
And this map won't change that in
Yeah,
any way.
none of this is changing any of that, and we've expended your time. We have to ask you to sit down and to work this out with the property owner.
Oh, okay, fine.
I'm sorry.
That's my only reason for the question.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has any comments on this item?
Yeah, I'm Will Moore in District 5. Was formerly a certified chief of party, and I have many years' experience in boundary surveys. And this issue has been in court thousands of times. And the line is where the court says it is, not where the record map says it is. And the court, in high probability, will rule that the occupation line is the border.
So we're not going to speculate on
But that's just-
what the legal, I thank you.
It's a point of information.
Yes, thank you. Is there anyone else who has anything to say on this item? Okay, we're going to bring this back to the commission and close the public comments portion of the hearing. Does anybody have any questions for Scott or Peter or the applicant?
No, but I'd like to recognize the presence of former Commissioner Joseph Pacelli, who showed up today possibly to receive the Why Is He Here award.
Thank you, Commissioner Kim. I'll leave. Thanks. Good comment on that stuff.
Nice to see you, Joe.
Are we ready to hear the proposed negative declaration and resolution?
I have
Or
one
your questions?
suggested change on the resolution on page 3, under Planning Department 2-1. Says this approval is for a tentative parcel map to divide 0.84 acres into 2 lots, et cetera.
0.77, right?
7-7.
Correct.
Yeah, the original application was a different size, so I'll change that.
I have a question on page 2, finding number 3. The project will not cause substantial environmental damage or substantially and avoidably injured. Can't we just cross out the and avoidably? I mean, is there any question is that it's going to cause unavoidable damage?
I don't see any problem with striking that two words.
Well, if you don't see any problem with that, then how about changing or to nor? The damage nor substantial.
We can do that too.
Sure. I think we're...
Any other comments? I think we're ready.
All right, staff recommends that the Planning Commission pass a motion to sign Resolution 2019-013 as amended, adopting the secret determination and approving tentative parcel map 2018-016.
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passed on a 5-0 vote. Oh, the appeal period, you want to go ahead?
Peter, the appeal period for this, if anybody wants to
Thank you.
appeal it?
Yes, this action is final unless appealed to the Board of Supervisors within 15 calendar days.
Thank you. are going to move on to our continued hearing on the general plan. And Peter's going to remind us where we are.
A moment to get organized here a bit. All right, back to the general plan. I'd like to welcome Commissioner Fiorino. Thanks for sitting through all the rest of the hearings, and I'm sure you wanted to chime in as often as you could, but now's your opportunity. Welcome. So, on June 7th, we concluded the review of the noise, safety, and public facility services elements. We began a discussion of the community planning element with some direction to be come back with some changes. I provided that to you. Copies are available on the railing there. We've also posted it on our website. In addition to that, it may be easier to we just go through some other final cleanup issues that have been before us. I provided to you a memo dated June 11th that sort of summarized the changes that we made at the last two meetings. There were a lot of changes. That was quite an effort to track all those down. Hopefully we captured them all. Sometimes my notes weren't quite as clear as I would have liked them to have been. And Julie and I got put together our heads and tried to muddle through our own notes to figure out what was the direction on this one. And so, again, hopefully we've captured those appropriately. Included in that packet was a revised final draft of the conservation and open space element policies and implementation measure. I do hope that we captured all of those. The revised draft that showed the various edits that you made in the other three elements were also included in that packet. There was, because when we were discussing the implementation measure regarding the provision of public water and sewer, that we referenced back to the land use table that showed where such public water and sewer were required. And so a revised table was also provided in that packet. I did receive an email from Commissioner Lattice that said, I'm not sure that we've captured that properly, so we'll probably want to discuss that somewhat. I've also passed out a number of other documents. One is a proposed change to implementation measure COS-5K regarding odors. After review of this with council, we thought it would be cleaner to use the actual language from CEQA as far as the terminology that's used as far as the impact. This was identified as a potentially significant impact, and this new measure was a mitigation measure. But because it used some different terminology, we felt that it was appropriate to use that. And that's this document here. It just says proposed changes to IMCOS 5K to address consistency with CEQA terminology at the top. So we would like you to make that change as well, or accept that change if you feel it's appropriate. That's one. What else am I missing here? I think that's it. So I guess at this point in time, the two things I'd like to discuss before we get into the edits to the conservation or the community planning element is a review of table LU1 and a review of that policy. Is that acceptable to the commission? table. So previously, there was a note under, this would have been on the fourth page of the table where it says mixed-use lands. Under the Historic Center land use designation, there was a C note next column, and it talked about the rural communities where public water and sewage treatment is unavailable, that encourage those extensions, but in some cases it's not feasible, and therefore alternative means can be allowed. With the discussion of PF4D, where we identified where there were exceptions.
And actually, it's 2D.
2D, I'm sorry, thank you. After a while, they all also blend together. 2D, that my understanding was that, we were saying that wherever we required public sewer and water, that we could, in some certain circumstances, if we made the findings, there's a list of criteria we needed to make, that it would be possible to approve a project. And that differed a little bit from what was initially where it said that it was, I think there were 4 different land use determinations: industrial, commercial, and the community center and historic center designations. So I think that's the issue, whether it applied to all designations that required public sewer or water, or we want to just keep it to those 4 designations.
Could I speak to that?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, the original table only had the possibility of exceptions to the public water, wastewater requirements for just 4 land designations: historic center, commercial, commercial recreation, and industrial. And the commission has taken no action to expand the applicability of those exceptions. Accordingly, Measure PF-2D provides that exceptions can be considered only when Table LU1 indicates that some exception might be available to property with that designation. By expanding the class of when exceptions might be available to every possible land designation that requires water, public water and public wastewater, this is a very important and threatening expansion. I mean, we even, right now, even future specific plan properties.
That was clearly an error on my part.
Yes, well, I think my point is that at some point there was a process where they narrowed things down to these 4 designations. Now, I really don't want to take a whole lot of time today discussing each designation and whether it's appropriate or, as with the future specific plan designation, inappropriate to even consider exceptions. So I'd like to take this back to what the original table had, as only those 4 exceptions. And also I'd like to change the wording of the footnote G, which itself has some policy content in it and some generalizations that, again, I think we could take a lot of time talking about them, and I think it's much cleaner if we just change that footnote G to say limited exceptions to public water and or sewage treatment requirements are provided for this land use designation in implementation measure PF, and it's -2D. I followed your 4D lead there. Anyhow, that was certainly the intention when I proposed PF-2D And I didn't intend for us to get into a long discussion about whether we should expand those, contract those. I accepted the 4 designations that had previously been chosen, and I was just trying to clean up when the exceptions could be available.
Let's find out what the other commissioners think. Commissioner Wooster,
I think I'd like to hear from the public on this first.
you want to hear? Okay.
Others may have something to say now. I don't.
Anybody have anything to say?
You should go to the public.
Okay, so I'm going to say right off, I think we should go back. I think that this expansion of it is not at all what the intention of our previous discussions was. In fact, we said we didn't want the subscript added to the top of the column. We only wanted it to apply. So let's go ahead and open this up for public comment on this particular item.
Good morning, Colleen Platt, My Valley Springs and the Calaveras Planning Coalition. I agree with Mr. Laddish completely. I was pretty surprised to read all of the footnote Gs in the table applying to every land use that had public sewer requirement. In fact, if you're going to call PF2D public water and or public sewer wastewater requirements, that's not what you're doing here. This is exceptions. So you should change the title of that to exceptions, because that's what you're laying out is the exceptions to the requirements for public water. Yeah, originally in that PF2D, it had industrial, public institutional, public recreation, and commercial in there as allowed exceptions, which 2 of those weren't reflected in the table. So by doing this, it took out public recreation and public institutional, which I'm not sure you intended to do that either. So that maybe consider putting that back in there, because you do want to require public sewer with some exceptions. So this is getting confusing, but you added, by mistake, added lots of things in here, including rural high density and commercial and all sorts of things that you are making exceptions for public water, and that's I didn't think that was intentional, because I know Commissioner Henderson did ask whether this just applied to I, PR, PI, and CR, and the answer was confusing to me in the audience, and I thought, now wait a minute, they're not going to apply to everything, are they? And they did. So I think everybody was confused during that discussion, and that shouldn't have happened. As Mr. Laddish said, this is a significant change to policy, and it could cause significant new environmental impacts if you allow exceptions for public water and sewer on all of these land use designations. And before we get off of that, because I think there's some direction there, the very last bullet point in PF2D that seemed to be in question about the CEQA documentation for the project. If you do include all of these other land use designations, a lot of these are by right. You have a land use designation, you can by right build on it, you're not going to go through CEQA. So these, what you think are guarding protections here wouldn't apply to these parcels, because you wouldn't be going through CEQA. So that's another reason not to include all of these land use designations, that you could just do all of this by right without having to get a CEQA document that would show that impacts to water quality and quantity would not occur by not requiring public water and sewer. I'm not stating that very well, but this is a confusing issue. So please kind of go through this again and verify your intentions. Thank you.
I wrote a letter to the Planning Commission about the general plan, and apparently it was put in the general plan, along with the other letters and responses. And
Excuse me, was this a recent letter or
No,
back when they were taking
it's
input?
in,
Thank you.
okay. So anyway, I stated in that letter that there is a lot of waste of water in the way we are processing sewage. I don't believe in what we're doing. I think it's Bill Gates has some kind of symposium every year about how to process sewage, or I don't think they call it that, but anyway, I think that the county needs to take a serious look at the way we're doing sewage, because it wastes a lot of water. And Governor Brown, as he was leaving, said that we're all going to each get 5 gallons of water per person per day. And if you flush the toilet once, you're giving up a lot of water. It depends on the toilet. I don't believe in that kind of waste. And plus the fact is, I believe that human waste is full of a lot of nutrients and good stuff that can help the environment, rather than treating it like something that's horrible. And so I have a very strong belief in this, and I don't see it being addressed. Bill Gates obviously thinks it's a pretty good...
I'm sorry, we veered pretty far off of the topic that we're discussing right now.
Well, you know, it's about sewage, and I thank you for letting me say what I said. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this item? None. Okay, commissioners.
Okay, I agree that my understanding of the intent after the last meeting was to restore the 4 classifications that had previously been eligible for an exception. And I also think that Commissioner Ladish's change to the footnote is appropriate and clear. I do wonder whether future specific plan ought to be eligible for an exception, because you don't know where those are going to be and whether it would be more feasible for them to have their own private water systems and own private sewage systems. And that's the only...
I think that, yeah, that's an interesting separate point I think we could look at.
Well,
if they could develop a community-wide system, then that might be acceptable.
But it's not acceptable unless footnote G applies there.
Or we provide a different footnote specifically for future specific plans that allows a community-wide
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
The specific plan itself could provide for a community-wide system, and that would then take precedence over what's here in
Or would we need a different footnote just to cover that item?
Gotcha.
I think that's a good point. Commissioner
Okay.
Fiorino? Oh, sorry. Are you not done?
With that clarification, I think I'm fine with what Commissioner Laddish has suggested.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly.
Also agree.
Yeah, I'm not going to assume you agree.
Yes. No, I've had a chance to think this. No, that'd be fine, but I think an appropriate footnote under the future specific plan might be a good thing.
I agree with everybody. So now we need to
I
work
guess-
on a little bit of wording there.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of this future specific plan was that they would be connecting to public sewer. That's why we only have 2 locations. We know where they are. They're both either within or adjacent to a service district that provides public sewer and water. And I think that was a part of the proposal when we looked at those sites originally back in 2016, that yeah, this is a logical area for extension of urban development because of its proximity to public sewer, public services, or transportation, et cetera. My concern, I guess maybe the reason why I inadvertently assumed that it would be applied to all is the language of PF2D. It says, when table LU1 indicates that a land use designation normally requires public water and public sewer systems. So that doesn't just apply to those 4 designations. In the discussion we had, we talked about, an apartment in Mountain Ranch, for a fourplex in Mountain Ranch or some, location like that, where you might have enough land to put in a well and a septic to serve it, and there's no way to provide. So I guess I just wanted to give you my reasoning for why I assumed that that was what you had intended. We probably then need to revise LU2D to reflect that it does apply only to those 4 land use categories.
Well, it has in it the language and only, let's see, you've changed it a bit, and only when table LU-1 indicates that some exception to one or both of those requirements might be available to property with that designation. So that's supposed to take care of, look for the footnotes. Because, to start with, why you had references to, what was it, PF 2.6 in those 4 categories, and by the time we got to PF 2.6, it had been renumbered and et cetera.
Right.
But that's the point of that language, is it's only when there's an indication with that designation that exceptions might be available, and that's what the footnote was supposed to do.
So all you have to do is have the footnote appear only with respect to those 4 designations in the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's your call, that's fine. I just wanted to sort of try to explain why.
No, I didn't assume that there was any nefarious, he's out to bury us in sewage here.
Commercial, recreation, industrial.
And we can,
So I think Ms. Platt mentioned the Parks and Rec and public institutional. So public institutional, probably not really an issue, but Parks and Rec, I could see how if you developed a fairly remote park, you might not have access to public water and sewer, and that might be a place that it would be appropriate to add that footnote. Let's see how everybody else feels about that.
Was it there before?
So I think that would be a 5th.
Well, the 4 were historic center, commercial recreation, and industrial. So you're thinking to add parks?
Parks and Rec.
I don't have a problem with that.
I agree.
okay.
We have a lot of nodding there also.
I'm just saying, in that measure, Parks and Rec and public institutional was in PF2D before, and there were
Well, yeah,
reasons for that.
but it wasn't in the table.
I know. Yeah, I'm just saying, do you not?
I understand that word,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, you don't.
So, and initially, that note applied to the historic center designation. And wasn't listed in that original policy. And so do we want to
Well,
extend that to historic center?
The
or
original,
not?
the original policy was so messed up. I tried to just,
I understand that, but the question is, do we want to extend this provision to historic center designation as well?
well,
Which would cover then places like
Right, these
Mountain Ranch or
oddball
Railroad Flat or,
locations.
or Glencoe, where Glencoe doesn't have a historic center, does it?
and it is one of the 4.
It's one of the 4.
Is it?
We
Yeah.
had it
Yes.
as one
Yeah.
of the 4.
Okay, but it wasn't in the original one. That's what
It was in the original table.
Okay.
Or maybe it was.
I'd say disregard the policy, which was so
Okay.
messed up.
All right, so just so I'm clear, can we just sort of
They're
quickly
direct,
list
Yes.
where that footnote will go, on which designation, that it's historic center,
Commercial recreation, industrial, which I have some questions about, but I didn't want to reopen everything. And Parks and Recreation?
So 5 of them.
Correct.
Yeah, they've added Parks and Recreation.
Okay. And then the edits proposed to the footnote by Commissioner Laddish was unanimously accepted.
Not everybody, so
Yes,
Peter can
yes,
see you.
yes.
And with the citation being to PF-2D and not 4D.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And later on, we can get to the language of PF-2D. but
Did you guys get on?
I think this clears up the table if you want.
It was a yes. Okay. I'll let Peter lead us on to what he thinks is the next item to discuss.
I think it was Colleen brought up the question of why don't we just go into that that fourth bullet, and there was a 2-2 split on the commission on whether or not we want to include the language regarding secret documentation, and this might be a good time to use the opportunity of the fifth commissioner here, break the tie.
And there's also...
And any other edits you want to make to this one?
Yeah, okay. The second bullet point.
So just a
Oh, I'm
minute.
sorry.
I'm going to let somebody else start this time.
Sure, he
The
was
Commissioner
asking me a question, I'm sorry.
Well, do you have any other edits that you would like to see to PF2D? And how do you feel about that fourth bullet that we discussed a couple of meetings back?
Trying to find it on all my notes. I know,
It's on page PF 19.
We'll be
Right.
having
The
because
final draft.
I've been out of town for the last week or since
Yeah.
last
No,
meeting. I
that's
got
okay.
home
If
last
you
night
don't
at
have
1:30 in
anything
the
to
morning.
add yet,
So-
we'll go ahead and swap around. Does anybody else have anything before Commissioner Laddish starts making suggestions?
Reading you.
I'm just thinking somebody else might have a point of view we want to get. Okay, go.
We're on
Okay.
IM PF-2D.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I will have things to say about that, but I can go after him.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened in the editing there. The second bullet point is now rather duplicative of the first bullet point. The second bullet point did say, and I know we discussed this and I didn't remember a change, extension of public facility, this is that you could get the exception from public water and public wastewater only if all of the following circumstances apply. One of those circumstances was, as I drafted it, extension of public facilities to the development site will, let's see, wait a minute, will not result in the potential for significant adverse effects related to growth inducement outside of existing communities. And somehow in the editing, that just got to extension of public facilities to the development site is not feasible or not allowed by the county. The first bullet point is connecting to public water and or public wastewater system is not feasible. So I don't know what happened. The
No,
point.
that is what was the result of our discussion.
Was it?
Peter
Oh,
has
okay.
exactly what he was directed there. The
Okay.
discussion was that in addition to growth inducement, there could be other reasons that the county does not want to
Okay,
see
well,
a line extended, like crossing an environmentally sensitive area or some other
Okay.
reason. So that,
Okay,
is that what
that's-
everybody else remembers?
Exactly.
Good, okay, well now I withdraw any suggestion.
I'm just trying to
I'm not
make
trying
it
to
short.
dredge it out. Sure. Okay, the fourth bullet point would read, The CEQA document for the project concludes that wastewater disposal impact and the impact of water quality and quantity when mitigated is less than significant. And the point of that was that I think it amplified the requirements that the exception is approved by the Environmental Health Department. I think this is an extremely important area. We're talking about water, and we're talking about sewage, we're talking about neighbors next door that might be affected by inappropriate sewage disposal measures, and also could be impacted by drawing excessive water from the water table. And so I think that it's important that the CEQA document indicates that the impacts from that disposal and also the water drawing is less than significant. That was my point then, that's my point now. I do think we want to make sure that we get in, that it was originally drafted, I didn't have the limitation that it had to be the impacts from wastewater disposal impact and the impact of water quality and quantity in there.
So this is the one item in which we had kind of a 2-2 split on our polling. And we have a new commissioner here today, and I think that in rereading this, I don't think we need the fourth bullet point. I hate to say it. Mostly because we're saying all 4 items have to be met, and some of these are going to be by rights projects in that table. And so there will not be a CEQA document. So it doesn't really make sense to require a CEQA document when there's no way for them to get it.
We could say if required.
We could say if required, that's a possibility, is to modify it. Or we could beef up the Environmental Health Department's responsibilities to make sure that it's not going to have a negative impact on neighboring, the environment or neighboring properties. So let's hear from everybody on that.
I did find my notes, and I thought also that should be just taken out. I think that if you allow an exception, for well and septic, I'm assuming that that's going to go through a process of approval. And wells, when you dig them, they should, I believe, you have to show that they produce enough water and capable of producing enough water to meet the need of whatever project is there, home or whatever. And also with the septic, that for whatever treatment, it's got to go through approval and show that it's going to also meet without affecting. I don't think by saying you have an exception, that means somebody can just go dig a hole in their backyard and use that for their sewage. There is regulations that tell them how it has to be done.
Right, which is addressed by the 3rd bullet,
Right.
is what I think you're saying.
Correct.
Well, I'm not in favor of having the 4th bullet point. I can expound that on that if need be, but
I don't
perhaps
think it's necessary.
Mr. Henderson, you were with Kelly before.
I am still in agreement with Kelly.
Okay.
I think we're clear on getting rid of the 4th bullet at this point.
Do you have a suggestion on the 3rd? I'm intrigued by
Well,
that.
I think that is and that's what the Environmental Health Department does. When they approve a septic system or a well, they look at the surround to see if there's any natural drainages, if there's any water nearby, what the neighbor systems are. So I don't think this is realistic, given that a lot of these projects aren't going to be going through any special discretionary permitting. I mean, what we're trying to do is allow for the oddball project that's sort of in the middle of something and is unable to get, for some reason, community water and sewer, or some other extenuating circumstance. So I think either they will be going through a CEQA process and this is going to get looked at anyway if they are discretionary. And if they're not discretionary, we don't really have any way to look at it beyond the Environmental Health Department. So, does the public have anything to add to this one, since we've gotten farther, deeper in the weeds on it since you spoke?
Well, Mr. Infacino is getting up here. It's a question.
He's going to let Colleen talk.
Oh, was when the reason, if there is a CEQA document and it says that the impact is significant and unavoidable, I think that's what I was trying to avoid.
It will have to be mitigated.
Oh, I didn't know you were done. I do sympathize with the reasoning behind bullet point 4. We've seen that happen before, where, places go in and they do impact the groundwater supply of the neighbors through improper planning, and we don't want things going out where there isn't public water and sewer. If you do restrict this, though, to those land use categories that you've reiterated, only Parks and Rec, in a real unusual situation. Historic centers, you've got some real difficult historic centers to work with, so that's understandable, and that's in the towns. Commercial, I think you have to be real careful about where you allow that without public water and sewer. Commercial recreation, that's not too big. Industrial, again, there's some issues there, so I'm a little uncomfortable with just allowing the only oversight being environmental health. I like the idea of having more oversight. I'm not sure how you can do that. Thank you.
Tom Infacino. Yeah, I agree with Colleen on this. It's very important that we're not in a situation where we're extending this exception to projects where there is a CEQA document and it says, well, the impact's going to be significant, unavoidable, too bad. We talk a lot about property rights here, and property rights matter for the person who's got a well in already. If somebody else comes in and draws it down, by putting a large development, commercial or industrial up gradient, that's going to cause land use headaches for you people. If you wanted to change this, I think Commissioner Laddish had a proposal, when a CEQA document is prepared for the project, it does not result, the conclusion is not that it's a significant unavoidable impact. Something along those lines may get you where you want to go. I think that's where he was headed anyway. Thank you.
So in the wording, it says, when table LU1 indicates that some exception to one or both of these requirements might be available, that perhaps should be may be available, and maybe we need to somehow work into there that it's at the discretion of planning staff, because I do agree that industrial, there might be a reason for them having their own independent processing, but it is something that I think most industrial projects would end up in front of us, but maybe not. It's possible that they wouldn't. So maybe we need to reinforce that just because you meet those three things doesn't mean that it will be determined that you're eligible for that exception. It's not a given, right?
Absolutely. And if you wanted to put, I would say maybe at the discretion of the approving authority, it could be commission of the board.
Exactly. Perfect. How does everybody else feel about that?
That's fine.
That's okay.
Are we perhaps done with this item?
I think so.
Peter, you're going to have to maybe read that back to us after lunch or something, or whenever you're ready.
I'm ready now.
Okay.
So When table LU1 indicates that a land use designation normally requires public water and/or public sewer systems, and only when table LU1 indicates that some exception to one or both of those requirements may be available to property with that designation. Allow exceptions to either or both of these requirements for discretionary projects at the discretion of the approving authority, only if all of the following circumstances apply. And then we have the 3 bullets that were previously in there.
Could we say at the discretion of the approving authority and only if all the bullets apply?
Okay?
I think these guys are rubbing off on me. Fussiness about words.
It's working.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're done with that. We've got the corrections to the table, corrections to PF2D. Since we're talking about the land use element, maybe now would be a good time to go to, I think I forgot to mention this in my initial presentation, the proposed revisions or revision to policy LU 1.6. This was the first attachment in my packet from the other day, as well as an additional implementation measure regarding future specific plans. We also have some suggested language and a new policy, from Commissioner Laddish, or a new implementation measure from Commissioner Laddish.
That was on my list too, but he's renumbered it. I kept calling it 1.6, but
Right, but
that's good.
He took that.
I already claimed that one.
Yeah, you can have
For
1.6.
those following along in the revised draft, the policy is on page LU 15, and the measure would be on page LU 20. And this would be the revised versions from the previous hearings that we had.
Would the commissioners like to hear from the public?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any comments on these items?
I'm having trouble following along. I understood the last meeting that you had, that we were supposed to be able to address what had been being talked about as we ended the meeting. And when does that take place?
So we're talking about those items right now.
I understand, but
Did you pick up
it's-
this big packet?
What?
Did you pick up this large packet here all the way to my right, your left? That, we're looking at the backside of the second page at attachment 1 to proposed additional language for future specific plans. So if anybody else hasn't picked up this packet, they might want it.
Yeah, we're trying to understand where you're...
Yes, so.
Well, I have a question. When will we be able to address what the end of the meeting was talking about?
What specific item are you?
Well, one of the things that really blares out at me is people were talking about restricting some of the powers that the supervisors now have. And I'll tell you something, I totally disagree with the supervisors giving up any of their authority or
So
What-
I know what you were talking about. There was some discussion among the commissioners about whether particular mitigation measures could actually be made enforceable, or if we were trying to tie the hands of the Board of Supervisors. So text on those items have generally been modified so that all the planning commissioners were comfortable with them, and there was comment from the public on those items. So they kind of come up randomly throughout the entire document
Well,
when somebody
today,
has an opinion about it.
I understood when we ended that meeting that today we would be able to address that.
So at the end of the last meeting, what we said is we would pick up where we left off. We would be reviewing items that we
You were
had-
talking about that.
No, we were not. We were
Okay,
only
well-
talking about that with regard to a particular
So
item which may or may
when
not
are
come
you
up
going to
again.
talk about that?
When it comes up again in the wording. There is no global thing, no piece of this document that addresses that specifically. It's really just that somebody is reading a section and their interpretation is that that might be trying to tie the hands of the supervisor. So it may come up again, but there is no specific measure that addresses that. Thank you.
Good morning, Tom Hicks. Just a comment on the new provisions. I don't have a problem with the language that was added. I just want to confirm with Peter that we are including the additional 4 parcels, because I don't see them listed here, so.
That was the direction of the commission. So the maps have not been changed. We have not had a chance to go back and create a new layer, fix those changes. Those will be changed. All the ones that were incorporated in my initial memo that had, a dozen or so, includes the changes to the properties just south of Forest Meadows, the idiosyncrasy pointed out by Colleen Platt on the Tuscany. We'll figure out a way to fix that. We don't really have a sort of transfer density. We don't have something that really fits that, but we'll make sure that that's accurate. The Oak Canyon Ranch change, as well as the 4 parcels that the commission decided should be included in the future specific plan.
And I think we had around 7 maybe items where people asked for a change to their general plan designation, and we granted those way earlier in this process where you were recommending yes to. So I don't know if those have been modified when specific landowners asked for something.
Yeah, I think the only changes that were made from the first or second hearing were the inclusion of the 4 parcels that this company owns, as well as the changes to the properties on the south end of Forest Meadows.
These were a whole little grouping of
And
items
then there was
that we
the
looked at.
packet that I had provided.
Yes.
And all those were.
So those
were
have
accepted.
been reflected.
Those will be reflected. We
Okay.
have not made the mapping
Okay.
changes yet.
That's all. That was
Yeah.
on my list also,
Yeah.
so thank you. Does any other member of the public wish to comment on these items? Commissioners?
We're on revised LU 1.6 and LU-2F. I think they're fine.
I think you've succeeded, Peter, in, by making this more of a generic thing, the future specific plan, what the standards are, and et cetera. It's made me much more comfortable, and I thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
And then the follow-up to this then would be the proposal by Commissioner Laddish on new LU2G.
That's on the handout that that was passed out this morning. It's a replacement for former policy 1.6 pertaining to changes in land designations outside community areas. Now, it's my recollection, which is not always accurate, that LU 1.6 was rejected primarily on the basis that it purported to bind how future boards of supervisors would deal with amendments to the general plan. And since that rejection, we have agreed on other provisions that provide current policies on how amendments to the general plan would be done, as we did with RP-1F, dealing with changes from resource production designation. So the measure proposed here takes a similar approach to that measure, and it implements a policy that's a basic to our general plan's goal of concentrating development in existing communities. And I'd like to point out, which was pointed out by Colleen Platt at one point, that really one of the strongest statements of that policy is in the introductory language to table LU1, that talking about community areas, it says these areas identify the regions of the county where higher intensity land uses and higher density residential uses are most suited based on infrastructure availability, reduced physical constraints, and existing development patterns. So this policy, well, actually it's not a policy, it's an implementation measure, would be LU-2G, and that would provide, before approving any proposed change outside community areas to land use designations with new higher density or intensity uses, determine that such change is necessary to meet the housing or employment needs of the county and is consistent with goal LU1, and, if resource production land is involved, the requirements of IMRP-1F. So my understanding is this is one of our basic themes of this general plan, is to concentrate development in community areas. And if people want to change their land use designations to something more dense or intensive use outside community areas, that they should pass a pretty tough test, and that would be that the change is necessary to meet the housing or employment needs of the county. So that's the reason why I would like to put this in.
I would like to see on the board RP-1F, if that can be done.
You'd like to what?
CRP-1F.
Oh, sure.
That'd be great.
I'm not sure if I have the final version of it here. Let's make sure this is consistent with what was ultimately approved. But that's not what happened.
I think what's shown on the screen as RP-1D is in fact supposed to be RP-1F.
Yes, right. Yeah, that was.
And I think that is the final
Is
version.
that the final version? Okay.
It was edited.
Yeah.
Now, that does not purport to bind the Board of Supervisors in any way when it's considering a conversion of resource production land to another non-resource production use. It simply sets up guidelines.
No, but it's,
And it will include other mitigation measures developed and/or approved by the county. It does not require anything else.
well,
It's just a list that they can use.
I understand it to mean what we would be converting resource production designated land to some other designation. And these are the mitigation measures that would be required if we were to do that. That's my understanding of what we're doing.
These are the mitigation measures that would be acceptable to the county normally, and they are non-exclusive. Look at the last one. Other mitigation measures developed and/or approved by the county. It is not exclusive, it does not bind the board on anything.
I think that's okay. I mean, I think he's just saying that if you are converting resource production land, that you have to comply with our other mitigation measures. Is that what your intent was?
Well, at that last part, just to make clear that there was this other procedure
Right.
that was involved. But the primary point of this implementation measure is to set forth a standard that could be applied, just as these mitigation standards could be applied, in a changing of a land use designation. Obviously, there's nothing that I could do to bind the Board of Supervisors to follow any particular direction when dealing with change of land use designations, because that is a change to the general plan, and that's up to their full discretion. But this is a statement of policy that they would have readily available, and they could choose to follow it, or they could amend the general plan by wiping this policy out and starting again with a clean slate. I just don't see any dead hand argument here that makes it so that, as with the change of designation for a resource production land, we're setting standards that we think should be applied. And it's up to the board to decide at that time whether they're going to amend the general plan and take those standards out or apply them. But this is our chance to give a thoughtful policy direction to the board.
Well, that's not what it says.
Well,
What it says is, before approving any proposed change outside community areas to land use designations with new higher density or intensity uses, determine that such change is necessary, etc. It doesn't leave any wiggle room. It purports to be mandatory. That's how it reads. Now, it even purports to control the procedure before the board. Before approving the change, the board has to make this special determination, which it's free to do without this policy, but it would be required to do so under the terms of this policy. First, it has to determine that the change is necessary, not appropriate, not desirable, but necessary to meet the housing or employment needs of the county. And those are the only two needs that are included. So if a project is proposed for a private school, or a medical facility, or a veterinary facility, or an animal shelter, according to this, the general plan amendment cannot be approved unless it can be shown it's necessary, and in those cases, it'd have to meet the employment needs of the county, since housing isn't part of it. The land use designation here has to be consistent with goal LU-1. That's the goal of development of a mixed-use communities. Since the project land use designation is outside the community areas, it would seem difficult to say it meets that goal. And it ignores other goals, such as LU-5, a strong and diversified economic base through the creation, retention, expansion, and attraction of business, agriculture, and industry. The necessary requirement is troublesome. It's easy for anybody who wants to stop a project that otherwise would be seen as beneficial to argue it's not necessary. The proponent can go somewhere else. Then there's the issue of what are new, higher density or intensity of uses. Would a proposal to change to an industrial designation be covered by that category? And I can't support an attempt to limit or restrict the board's right and ability to make general plan amendments in the future, and especially this one. And this general plan does not purport to limit development to community areas. It says at page LU3, Land uses are widely distributed throughout the county. Higher density residential, commercial, and industrial uses follow the historical development pattern in and around the existing communities where infrastructure and services are available. Areas around these communities have been designated to provide for expansion of commercial, industrial, and residential uses to take advantage of that infrastructure and to reduce the cost of providing services to a more widely scattered population. Land use policies are intended to encourage development within and nearby existing communities while maintaining their character and economic vitality. The plan does, however, provide ample opportunity for additional rural residential development, along with providing land to support a vibrant agriculture and timber economy. So I think this is just, yes, the board can, when it's considering a general plan amendment, could decide, we're just going to repeal this for this project. And it's not needed as a statement of, guiding them. If they need to be guided in looking at a proposed land use designation, they could perhaps listen to their constituents, take account of changing developments in the county, and basically do their job unhindered by this sort of thing.
Does anybody else have anything to add? Shall we take comments from the public? Would anybody like to speak to this? Before I confuse everything.
Well, I'm not sure that I can say anything to change Mr. Wooster's mind. He's pretty clear on that. Our opinion has always been that growth is supposed to be concentrated in community areas. That is the idea of the general plan, and that was the idea of setting up community areas with boundaries around them. There's a great concern about the sprawl that's already happened in this county, and we don't need more sprawl in the county, and this was the whole idea of having this kind of a policy. We had sent in suggestions, I'm sure you got them. If you didn't feel it fit under that goal about mixed-use community centers, then you could add a new goal. The goal was new development is directed to areas within or adjacent to existing community areas to reduce the significant impacts of sprawling build-out on resources and rural value. Either a goal like that or change the goal you have to broaden the inclusion of a policy like that. The wording of Commissioner Laddish's policy is similar to something we had suggested before that was in there before, and I think it's fine other than referring to RP1 for mitigation requirements, because they are not requirements, as Commissioner Wooster pointed out, they are guidelines. So if you change that one word, that would make that fit. I do think it's a good policy to guide future land use decisions when somebody's reading the general plan. If Kelly Wooster reads one part and sees one direction, and the land use map gives another, and community areas give another, and the description of community areas and the land use table gives another, you need something that's clear what your direction is. What is your policy? It's to concentrate your growth in and around community areas. You need something that says that clearly, and I think this says this pretty clearly. The board is not held to this. They can look at that and they can decide, and we're going to decide there's a different priority here. They can change it. They don't have to abide by it, but this gives them direction. So we support that, and we always have supported a policy that gives some sort of direction in community areas and not wanting to sprawl all over the county. Thank you.
I agree with Commissioner Wooster, and he said it very well, so I'm going to leave it at that.
Tom and Facino. First of all, the general plan needs to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. So there's no question about whether, if they don't like it, they won't put it in. If they like it, they'll leave it, they'll put it in. But there's an important purpose of the general plan we all need to recognize here. A general plan is the board expressing how it will exercise its discretion in the future. Why is that important? It's critically important so that those out in the marketplace can respond accordingly. People need to be on notice that if they want to develop urban-type uses, they have to be either in a community area or another area with land use designation that allows that use. What's the problem with not clarifying that is you give way to speculation. You create unreasonable expectations in people's mind. Peter, is there any way you could bring up the community map you put in for San Andreas? It looks like this on your packet. It's on page CP 31. If you could turn to that, it would be helpful. I'm going to run out of time. I beg your indulgence here for a second. Now we're getting there. 31. We're on 20. 41. How do we get from 20 to 41?
Why don't you keep talking while I try to find it?
Okay. If you're at CP 31 in the community plan handout that he gave you, and there he's got it up now, you can see a boundary around San Andreas. There's a red line around San Andreas. Do you see the red line on the map? Can we get there? Okay, that's the community boundary for the San Andreas community plan. So, what this policy says is, talks about if you want to build outside of that boundary. Now that begs a very important question. When can we expand the boundary of community area? And that's what needs to really be determined, because the other way to deal with this is to say, okay, I'm in the purple industrial designation, but I'm currently outside the boundary. Can I get the boundary expanded to cover my project so that I'm now within the community area? And if so, what are the standards for doing that? Why is that important? We don't want to have happen what happened in El Dorado County. They committed community areas, and they set a policy that, well, you can only develop in the community areas. And all of a sudden, the boundaries became these rubber bands that stretched all over the place to cover whatever new project needed to get covered. We don't want that. So what's really necessary here to complement the policy that LUTG2G that Commissioner Ladish has suggested is another policy to say, under what circumstances do we extend community boundaries to cover these nearby proposed developments? Is there going to be a certain percentage of build out that's required, when the community's, 50% of lots are built out, then you can start to expand the community. What is going to be the trigger that says we can expand that boundary? Should it have to be within a certain distance? Should it have to be within half a mile of the community? What are the kind of criteria you're going to use to expand that community boundary? Because the other question that becomes, if you don't need to be in a community area and you don't need to expand the boundary, are you saying that I could develop a parcel, a parcel right next to the community boundary and not to comply with any of the community plan requirements? I don't think that's really what people have in mind. I think what people have in mind is you come in, you behave like everybody else in the community. So, I think it's very important that we have these two complementary policies in the plan so that people are on notice that their reasonable expectation for meeting an investment desire is going to happen when they buy land that's designated for that, not when they try to seek to speculate on the boundaries of communities. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I'm Will Moore. I'm not a customary part of this process, so this is just a general comment. But this whole urban sprawl idea is a carryover from the agrarian age when 90% of the population were farmers, got 40 acres, a mule, and a potato patch. But the 40 acres has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk down to a half acre, but the mentality still is that this is a farm. And what we should be looking at is vertical construction. Instead of 100 houses on 100 acres, we should bring in Donald Trump and have him build a tower with 100 units in a condo with 100 acres of open space around it. We should be thinking along that kind of development more than this 40 acres and a mule idea. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we will come back to the commissioners. Anybody who hasn't already expressed an opinion?
I have some things to say based on the comments.
Oh, okay, but let's let these other folks have a chance to talk, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, just a write-off, I would be against this. I don't think it's necessary. And I do understand these community boundaries, but I also look around those boundaries, and there's different zoning there. And if somebody wants to expand beyond the boundary of that community, they have to get that zoning changed. They have to go through a process. They can't just stretch like rubber bands these community boundaries whenever they want. There's a process already in the plan. We talk about the need in our county for jobs. I've heard for 3 years about parents coming up and saying, we send our kids off to college, there's nowhere for them to come back and work. Yet it seems like we're always trying to limit any new jobs coming into the county. There's got to be some development. I've lived here we're getting close to 20 years now, and I haven't seen the sprawling development. Since I've been here in Valley Springs, I've seen a couple new businesses open. We're kind of glad there's some new businesses open. They've created some jobs. It's not sprawling outside of that. And I know if you look at the map that's being used for this general plan, it has a lot of zoning restrictions. And if you want to, it's just not all of a sudden going to get expanded sprawl. You've got to go and get the changing, zoning changed. And I don't like any policy that's in there that would limit our supervisors, because we get up every time we have a meeting, we pledge allegiance to a republic. We're a representative republic. We elect representatives that we believe are going to look out for our best interest, and we have to trust those representatives. They allow public comment. To be honest, and sitting and listening through all these meetings, I get a little frustrated because I'm hearing a lot of comments from one group. I'm a little frustrated because there aren't other people in the community that aren't getting involved. They need to be more involved, but I appreciate the work that this group is putting in, trying to develop their communities, but they don't necessarily represent their entire community. I've never heard of them until I started sitting in these meetings. So I guess I just, to say all that, I would oppose this.
Actually, I agree with Mr. Lash on this one because we want to keep the community centers centered. Throughout this whole general plan is keep everything centralized, cut down on greenhouse gases and amongst a whole other things that go hand in hand with this. If we keep allowing them to, well, this piece of land 2 miles from town is desirable and we can go out there and build, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So I agree with Mr. Lash on this one.
Well, I won't go into it.
Let me speak, please.
Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
Actually, Commissioner Wooster, you wanted to respond to some of the comments?
Just briefly, the comment was made in substance that people coming into the county to do business need to be on notice of what's permissible and what's not. The map does that. That's what the map is for. And the idea about limiting the ability to expand community areas, that's just another attempt to restrict the board and what it can do. And this really all comes down to kind of a quarrel, I think, with state law that gives the county and hence the Board of Supervisors the right and the ability to amend the general plan X many times a year. And this is an attempt on its face to limit that right, limit that ability. And the only thing that can be said in its favor at all is, well, they can get rid of this too if they don't like it. Well, you can say that about anything we're doing. And of course, yes, the board will have to approve this, and if they don't like it, maybe they won't. But I think it's our job to recommend to them something that we think is appropriate.
Commissioner Laddish, would you like to say anything more before I start talking?
Just a short thing. I mean, as Commissioner Wooster just recognized, I mean, nobody's restricting the board. It's the board that passes on this general plan. And as far as the map goes, it's clear that our land use map has plenty of room for development with the designations that are already in it. This is only talking about changes in designations. But I would change the word requirements toward the end of this proposed to provisions, which I think would be more appropriate. But with that.
So surprisingly, I'm kind of in the middle, of course. I understand everything that everyone has said. However, I was uncomfortable with the removal of the original LU 1.6 and uncomfortable with the exact language of it. So one of the things when I was reviewing just where we were at with everything is that I didn't see a policy that talked about maintaining open space between our communities so that they would remain distinct, unique communities, and that we would maintain our rural character, which are all things that have been expressed by the public, not just here, but at many of the early meetings that I attended, and that I hear all the time, and that we've expressed in the general plan. So I would like to see us craft some policy here that kind of addresses both of these things. The other missing piece that I saw was nothing in our community plan element, which we're going to talk about later, on how and when we expand community plan boundaries. And I'm not looking to come up with a number when there's only 4 parcels left within the community plan boundaries, we can expand it. I think it could be appropriate to expand it for all sorts of reasons. If somebody came along and had a really great project that we thought was important to the community, we'd want to expand the community plan boundary to encompass that and give them the flexibility that being within the community plan gives you. So I don't have the exact wording. I just think these are issues that we have somehow left hanging. So I'd like to see something, and maybe we need to work on the wording of Commissioner Laddish's item. Maybe it's a completely new thing that addresses our desire to maintain and enhance our communities while maintaining the space between them. So I don't know, somebody out there's probably written something like this already. I don't think that I am looking to restrict the Board of Supervisors. We've already talked about this. They can X out anything we put in here. I'm not looking to provide something that says they have to have these findings, or it has to, I mean, if they do it, they have to find it consistent with the general plan anyway, so that's not necessary. I just think we need something that directs and encourages and somehow makes clear that it has been the desire of the people who have participated in this process to have clear communities and clear space between communities. I think I have a couple of ideas. You know, one is to be less not they shall have these findings or they shall determine, but be more of an encouraging, directing. Also, I think that we could say that it's when it's necessary to meet the goals of the county, and it could apply to housing, business, anything that we think is necessary or would enhance our community. So that's it, and I'm sorry I didn't come with any really beautiful, wonderfully crafted language. So, I don't think I'm prepared to support this exactly the way it's written, but I am interested in putting something in this spot.
So it sounds like I have a new assignment.
I'm so sorry.
And,
Or maybe I could work on it at lunch.
Well, I was going to suggest that maybe at lunch I could try to craft something on the fly, and come back to, let's table this item for the time being and move on to, there was one other item that Commissioner Laddish had dealing with the introduction on page 2 of the land use element.
Yeah, and that's just a clarification.
Where are we?
Page 2 of the land use element, that there's a sentence that said, talks about all the communities in Calaveras County. And the sentence now says, more detailed descriptions and history of these and other communities are included in the community planning element of the general plan. And they're not. It's only a few of them. So I am just suggesting that we change that to more detailed descriptions and history of some of these and other communities, and maps of every community, Calaveras County community area, not including the Angels Camp, are included in the community planning element of the general plan, and in the documents referred to in that element, which we have to get to later because your reference got cut off in your...
Right.
So we're not really sure
It was
what you
a
have.
sentence that petered out.
So to speak.
I didn't really.
It happens all the time.
Gosh, I'm more clever than I thought.
Anyhow, presumably we're going to have documents referred to in the community plan, and that sentence would then...
The only thing I would suggest on this would strike the word "and other," where it says "and other communities," because I don't know what other communities we're referring to.
Okay.
At this point.
I think it makes sense, but it's all right. I'm happy to get out of it. I think it's that there are some communities that weren't just mentioned, but that's all right.
Do I have any comments on that suggestion?
I think it's fine.
Commissioner Fiorino, you're nodding over there? Yes, okay. I agree.
Are there any other loose ends before we jump into the community planning element?
Well, I thought we would be going through all your attachments and the amendments that you've made in there.
Okay.
Conservation and open space, maybe?
Well,
Not everything was just fine, perfect, no wishful thinking.
well, great improvements, how's that?
Well,
So,
that's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
But I would suggest we just flip through it, and if anybody has any changes
yeah, I
or
don't think there's need
questions.
for me to go through it.
Oh,
and
right.
identify those changes, but if
Right,
there's
no, I
anything
think-
that I missed, by all means, let's catch those now.
Right.
Um, So I think that the safety element,
Well, shall we start
Do we
with
want to go in
conservation?
order? Do we want to go backwards like we did last time? Do you have a plan?
wherever you want to go.
Well, I would just start with attachment 2.
Yes, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
That's what I would
If
suggest.
anybody has any suggestions,
My first suggestion's on page 13. Right at the bottom, COS 3.10, says preserve and enhance healthy woodlands. I don't want to only pay attention to healthy woodlands. So I'd have preserve and enhance woodlands and support their health, consistent with state law.
I'm not sure there's a difference.
Well, if there's woodlands, if somebody says, oh, well, the woodlands I have are really shoddy, so you don't have to worry about them, I would like to support the health of those woodlands as well as somebody's healthy woodlands. I don't know if you meant healthy woodlands as a term of art, but if it isn't defined, it shouldn't be.
I would be fine with just preserve and enhance woodlands consistent with state law, a reasonable development and fire safety considerations.
That's fine with me.
Well, suppose they are a woodland consistent of unnatural, overgrown, impenetrable, small live oaks.
Would you like natural woodlands?
No, I would like it the way it is, because that kind of a woodland is not healthy.
Right, it says consistent with reasonable development and enhance, and I think that there was a discussion last week sometime about that there are developments in which they would want to improve an existing woodland and maintain it because of its value to the development. I understand what you're saying is we don't want to require people to maintain their manzanita.
Or their scrub oak.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
I
right.
understand.
What we want are healthy woodlands.
Right.
And that's what this is saying before the suggestion was made to change it.
And this was the language that the commission came up with last time.
Yes, I think it's fine how it is.
Okay,
I mean,
let's keep it the way it is.
Okay.
I like that. Encourage, preserve, and enhance.
No, just add it.
That's what I thought I just did.
My next one is on,
Encourage woodland, but, I mean, you
Oh, I
can
think-
encourage the development, or you encourage, some
The
human action,
enhancement.
but, woodland's gonna do what it's gonna do.
I understand the desire, but I think we're telling them to, we're not just encouraging, so I think that's a whole different issue, the encouragement.
I'm fine keeping the
Either way, like, let's leave.
And my next one's on page 14. And that's just on COS 4.2 at the bottom. It refers to IMCOS-5A. It also should be referred to COS-5I, which is where a lot of this language went.
Yeah.
And on COS 15, I think we should explain to people, it looks as if lots of stuff is just being wiped out of the general plan that protects things. They're being shifted to implementation measures instead of policies. So I think if you look later on, you'll find all of these are there in implementation measures. COS 4.13 was not eliminated, but there is a COS-5L that has its contents, so I think you meant to cross out 4.13 also. You with me with that?
Thank you.
you're talking about COS 4.13.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's the issue?
It's just that it's duplicative
repeated.
of COS-5L. And we don't need both. And I assumed that was meant to, COS-5L was meant to
Yes.
replace COS 4.13.
Yep. since they're exactly the same.
So we eliminate 4.13.
Yeah,
Yes.
as long as we don't eliminate them both. And on COS 20, on COS-4D, on its face, this language is confusing in that it says, develop something pursuant to this in addition to what's provided in the same section. Actually, if you look at the copy of that Public Resources Code that was provided by Commissioner Wooster last week, this is accurate but confusing. I'm suggesting that we say develop a local, or develop local mitigation measures under the authority of PRC, which gives the county to develop local measures, in addition to the state mitigation measures provided in Public Resources Code such and such.
Well,
I did just notice I missed an important addition to the second reference to that. It was supposed to include B, sections 1 through 3.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's why those were referenced differently.
Yeah, we use the phrase develop mitigation measures pursuant to PRC 21083.4B4 because that's the exact language out of the statute. And then if you just say, in addition to the mitigation measures provided in section 21083.4 paren B, paren 1-3, you're accurate.
Yep, but I would, just for clarity, I would suggest you put local mitigation measures, which we're going to be developing local mitigation measures, and then say in addition to the state mitigation measures. Because otherwise somebody just coming across this language that is not familiar with the intricacies of this section is going to be scratching their head.
They're going to have to read the statute to make any sense out of any of it.
Okay, it's easy. Make
Okay.
it clear, that's all.
Let's just take a 2-second break there. We are required to develop a local oak woodlands preservation plan, are we not?
No.
No, okay.
No.
I had understood that the state required us to have some sort of a plan,
We have to
but we can
mitigate
just
pursuant to the
adopt
state law.
theirs.
The state law allows us to come up with our own effective
Or
mitigation program.
adopt
Or
and
simply
implement
rely on
theirs. Gotcha, okay. So I think it's more, this is really a philosophical thing. Are we saying that we want to develop local mitigations in addition to those that the state is providing? That is what we want to say?
That is what it says.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I think then Commissioner Laddish is correct that it would be more clear to a layperson reading it to say, develop local mitigation measures pursuant to blah, blah, blah.
Plus-
All of your correct language.
A mitigation measures also doesn't work, even if we didn't
That's
do
struck
that.
out.
Yeah.
A is
Yeah.
struck
Yeah,
out.
it's hard to see the strikeout.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to see.
Sometimes it lines up with part of the line.
So would you have any problem with it saying?
No,
local?
not really.
And then state mitigation measures in the second.
Well, I don't need,
In addition to the state mitigation measures.
it's up to you guys. I don't feel the state's necessary. We're quoting a state.
I don't think it is. We're quoting a statute.
Yeah.
Yes, we're quoting the statute before too. That's okay, guys. Then down in the underlined language, you have RPC 21083.4, and it should be PRC.
Yeah.
Well, I have another suggested change on page 21, the second bullet point. I mean, I don't have a problem with what's there, but I don't think it's what we discussed. Where it says mitigation consistent with the provisions of PRC 21083.4, other than avoidance shall be applied at a 1-to-1 ratio, and the types of mitigation chosen shall be informed by the recommendations of the qualified professional, et cetera. I think what we had talked about was it would be a ratio between 1.1 and 2.1. And I think to fix it, we could say mitigation consistent with the provisions of PRC 21083.4, other than avoidance, shall be applied at a ratio of 1.1 to 2.1, period. The ratio and the types of mitigation chosen, et cetera, shall be informed.
I think that's a great
I
suggestion.
agree, that's what we discussed.
And I have a suggestion as to COS-4H, impacts to
Hold on,
biological.
I want to make sure I get this. 'Cause
Yeah.
This has been the problem. You guys
Yeah.
move on.
This-
Yeah.
this section is-
So, I have
You want to say it again?
shall be applied at a ratio of 1.1 to 2.1, period. The ratio shall be informed.
No, the ratio and the types of
types.
mitigation chosen, et cetera. It just continues on the way it was.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Do you have anything else before, or anybody else before COS-4H? COS-4H, on page COS 21. I don't understand the need for the language right before the colon and the bullet points, or as otherwise required by state or federal law. We are talking about certain types of special status species. And I just don't understand why we have that language in there. If it's necessary, that's fine. If not, it's confusing to me. There should be somewhere else or something. It just seems to me we just ought to have, for development that is subject to a discretionary entitlement and subject to environmental review under CEQA, require project applicants to enlist the services of a qualified biologist and to minimize, avoid, and/or mitigate significant impacts to the following special status species, colon. If we mean it, well, we should say, and other species that may be required by state or federal law, but
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if it was really another bullet that we meant.
I don't
But we say
understand.
that both below, so.
I think it was just a catch-all in case the list missed something. I don't see how it
Well,
hurts.
grammatically, it's a strange sentence construction, if we have a suggestion. The only other things I would suggest as to that measure is that after we first cite Federal Endangered Species Act, we put in parentheses FESA, and do the same thing with the California Endangered Species Act, parentheses CESA. Makes it clear that we later are talking about that.
Yep. I agree, it's a little bit of an odd sentence structure, but I read it exactly the way Commissioner Wooster read it, like it's just in case we're missing something here.
Or something.
Like
Yeah, you have to comply
grammar
with
and
state and
sentence
federal law.
construction.
Before we leave this item,
If you're okay with leaving it in, I don't need to say anything.
are we okay with just leaving it?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
And we're going to insert the, what FESA stands for.
FISA and,
Makes sense.
yeah. COS 23 and upland habitat, I hope you did make a note. I think we decided we needed a definition of upland habitat in the glossary.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I'll make sure I bring that this afternoon.
Then we're, in my way of thinking, we're down to the question on, as far as the interim GHG reduction measures, which that's over to you.
So the question it was whether these were the intended measures. Were they captured? That's your question, right?
Yeah, this is in the memo, June 12th memo
Right.
from Peter,
Here.
that the interim GHG reduction measures didn't make it into the corrected draft, and I thought that we had a sufficient consensus to include them.
Thank you. So this pretty much reflects my understanding of our discussion. Does anybody else? Commissioner Laddish, what were you?
Oh, I'm happy with the language.
I think it reflects the discussion. I still don't like COS-5Y on the wood-burning appliances, and I can expound on that if need be, but if there's a consensus to include it, I'm not going to waste people's time.
And I actually did do just a little bit of research on this. The new building codes are not posted online yet, of course, but I went to the EPA's website, and in May of 2020, new requirements for wood burning heaters are going into effect that just reduce the particulate matter that can be emitted from them, but I didn't see anything that limited the number. They also did not apply to fireplaces, but to heating appliances, which have a different definition than your decorative fireplace. So our discussion was pretty much accurate last time.
So I noticed on the wood-burning appliances is now a separate
Yes,
measure.
and that is what we
Not
discussed.
an interim thing, but
This was
wait.
Brett's
Oh,
baby.
okay. Great.
Well, let me see. COS-5Y, wood-burning appliances, I took it to be an interim measure. Is that not correct?
Yes, until such time as we have a real greenhouse gas plan. It was an interim measure.
Oh, well, then why isn't it a bullet point?
So my notes showed that it was we pulled it out
Yes,
because we do have standards today regarding wood burning stove. That was my
right.
recollection.
And I think
What my notes didn't reflect was whether or not it was agreement that it was going to go in at all, but it wasn't going to be listed as a part of the bullet points.
I think that that was the discussion. The discussion was to pull it out because it's likely to come up as, it's likely to become a permanent measure. I don't know if we want to call it, I mean, it's up to all the commissioners whether this becomes permanent. This was Commissioner Henderson's, was the one who had a very strong feeling about this item. As much as I love a wood-burning stove and fireplace as much as anybody, I think the limitation is reasonable. I do think, given the changes in what's going to be allowed in them, I think maybe we would want to limit wood-burning appliances to one non-EPA, or we want to say that everything installed should be an EPA certified appliance. Because once you get down to those really low emissions, I'm not sure that they're going to be the big problem. So right now, I think the issue is old wood burning stoves and fireplaces that are not required to meet any standard. So it's up to everybody what they.
I think on this, on new construction, if you limit it, to the EPA 2 rated, but not limit it to a number, You know, what if somebody lives in an area where the wood is their best source, and they want to use it for not just heating, but maybe heating and something
Right,
else?
and we had that discussion
Yeah, I
last
think
time.
that's why, the only thing about limiting it to one, I think that,
So what if instead we were somehow to make sure that this applied to any wood-burning appliance installed in new
And just strike the
construction?
word one would do that.
Mr. Henderson, what were your intentions and what would you like to do?
Could you live with if we said wood-burning appliances shall be limited in new construction to EPA 2 rated or the most current EPA standard at the time of application? So they could have two, but they would both have to
yeah, they would
comply.
have to comply.
As a-
And we get rid of more of the underbrush, and so we get rid of.
Yeah, well, that's way better than what's here. I mean, I envision somebody who wants to build a house in Tamarack. He wants a really big house, and he wants 2 stoves, because he doesn't want to depend on the power. He's got all kinds of dead trees on his property that's gonna fall down or already have, and he's gotta do something with them. Goes to get a building permit, and he's told, no, you can only have 1 stove. So now what's he do with all that junk on his property? He
Right.
can haul it off, or burn it in place, or let it sit there and rot, and nothing can grow underneath it to a
And it looked like the reduction was was pretty significant, that they will be very, very clean in this next go-round. So I would be okay with that.
So no limitation at all on the number?
On the number, but we're getting rid of decorative fireplaces in this case that burn a lot of wood, create very little heat, and don't have any requirements for pollution control.
I think we would need, here comes the glossary again. We need to define wood-burning appliances somewhere, or refer to some federal statute or whatever.
Yeah, wood stoves,
Because-
fireplaces, maybe in parentheses, all wood stoves, fireplaces, etc. I don't think we can control somebody's fire pit outside, that's,
Wood-burning
different.
appliances, somebody might not, in good faith, might not say, well, this is a fireplace, it's not a wood-burning.
I don't think it's really an issue. We're talking about new construction, the building department's gonna enforce it, right?
I think we should
So
define
as
it.
long as we make sure that we're clear about it.
Well, fireplaces aren't regulated by the EPA, are they?
Correct. Wood fireplaces are not,
So are
but
we-
there are fireplaces that are EPA rated.
I think we should define wood-burning appliances, because I think this discussion is
Well,
indicating.
I don't know whether we're saying people can't have a fireplace in their new house, or what we're saying.
We're saying they can have a fireplace, but it needs to be one of the EPA rated fireplaces, not the little pressed metal ones that are inefficient and have no accommodations for trying to limit their emissions.
That sounds like fireplaces are wood-burning appliances.
Fireplaces are wood-burning appliances. Well, I agree that I think we need to have something here that says exactly what we're talking about.
Why don't you just say wood-burning appliances, comma, including fireplaces,
And, yeah,
comma, shall be limited in new construction to EPA rated, et cetera.
yes.
Or-
I think
or-
that's what we're,
Print it up. That was beautiful. I agree with that. Sounds good, because it's giving you a definition of what we're intending.
so
We're not
wood-burning stoves and fireplaces.
Is that instead of saying appliances?
It's okay with me. There are, the new requirements also apply to, there are a few things that people, off-grid folks use, like wood-burning furnaces, wood-burning boilers. I did a project many years ago that heated their radiant floors by burning trash and wood and this. So, but the new EPA requirements do apply to all of those items. Just not fireplaces.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. Okay, I think what we're going to have, I don't know what wood-burning appliances are, if they're fireplaces or not. I don't know what the coverage of this is. I think
So
we
that's
just
why
need to
we
come up.
just made to say wood burning stoves and fireplaces.
My only question, I guess, with fireplaces, they already have fireplaces that meet that. That's what you're saying.
Nothing ever,
This
yes,
would be
there
new
are
construction.
already
Yeah,
fireplaces.
but they
that
are
meet-
available, that's just what,
Yes. and-
already, yeah, because I don't want to require something that
So,
hasn't been developed
you
yet.
know that all of the inserts or the new fireplaces that, like Fireplace Extraordinaire, the ones that the face looks more like a wood
Right.
stove and they're airtight, those are generally rated.
Rated, okay.
So, just so I'm clear, we're changing the title to wood burning stoves and fireplaces, as well as the first line, wood burning stoves and fireplaces shall be limited to new construction to Calaveras EPA rated. Do we want the EPA 2 rated, or does that matter at this point?
Current EPA ratings?
That's current EPA.
Yeah, current EPA ratings.
Right,
Because it's
so
gonna
is our
change.
intention to only allow EPA rated? Okay.
So if somebody has a wood-burning furnace, then we're not,
I'm not coming to get a new,
huh?
they're not,
They can't do it?
they already have it, it's already there.
No.
We're
It's a
just-
new construction, and they want to cook their food on a wood-burning stove, they want to heat their house with wood. Are we covering that? I mean, that wood-burning appliances would seem to be broad enough to cover that, but now
So what I foresee is a likely issue here, so I have another suggestion of a way we could look at this.
Good.
Which is, we could say all wood burning, whatever word we want to use in parentheses, will be EPA rated, and we could allow one non-rated appliance because there are those people who want to use a reconditioned antique wood stove or a cook stove. I don't know that cook stoves that there are any EPA rated ones. I just don't have any idea. But generally, when people are using a wood burning cook stove, it's an antique one. So we could allow an antique legacy appliance, like one, and keep all the rest of them EPA rated. So, I mean, it's just, what is our goal? How far are we trying to take this?
Well, yeah. I mean, the emissions from wood-burning appliances, stoves, whatever in this county are really kind of inconsequential. If you're talking about carbon dioxide that's being created, that comes up from the valley. And I agree, there are people that do cook and like to cook on wood stoves. And they're always old because nobody makes them anymore. In fact, that's all we have in our cow camp in the mountains is a wood-burning stove, and you cook on it and you heat with it. That's it. And I'm sure it's not EPA rated.
Right, so that's why I'm suggesting, maybe we just say all appliances, you limit it to one non-EPA rated item in new construction. And the others, as long as they're EPA rated, they probably are inconsequential. The multiple non-EPA rated stuff is not inconsequential, and up the hill, when everyone's got their fireplaces going, it can be quite a lot of smoke.
let's see if we have another comment.
Yeah, so,
So you're suggesting that we say that wood-burning appliances shall be limited to one non-EPA rated appliance
yes,
per residence?
that's what I'm suggesting is a possible
Yeah, all right. Given
way to kind of get past the issues we
In
like.
addition to EPA rated ones.
Right, in addition to their EPA,
Yeah.
that all of them except the one has to be.
All other appliances shall be EPA rated.
Exactly.
I like that.
Tom?
My concern with that is, in my own life, in my own experience, I've had solar-powered water heating. And at times when it's stormy and cloudy, an alternate is wood-burning water heater, as well as, like Mr. Worcester's suggesting, and similar with wood, I don't know of any EPA-rated wood-burning water heaters. There may be some, I'm just not familiar with them, and same with, like you pointed out about the kitchen stoves, the antique kitchen stoves are another thing. Power failures as a backup. I just am concerned about eliminating things that are backup measures. I realize your gig is to regulate. My gig is to not like it.
Right. You're likely unusual in a small percentage of
Well,
new construction.
so that's why I'm speaking up for the
Yeah.
small percentage of unusual people.
Which is why we're saying we would allow one non-EPA rated.
Yeah, and I know, and I think I just pointed out a good reason to have two, but we can agree to disagree.
Well, we're talking about new construction here.
Yes, we are. He's a burn scar person, so
Yes,
he's talking
That's
about
why
a
I'm concerned
rebuild.
with new construction that isn't just dense developments, because my whole neighborhood is about to hopefully be subject to big new construction. And we all live off the grid where things like that matter to us disproportionately to suburban housing developments.
So we could actually take care of that by simply saying that this wouldn't apply to off-grid construction, entirely energy independent construction, which is not subject to a lot of things.
That's an interesting thought.
You know, I think the last speaker has a good point. I mean, I really do. You have people in the upcountry, particularly the Butte fire victims, and you get further up the pass. I mean, wood never fails you.
But they can have 10 wood stoves under this
Yeah, but,
thing.
I mean, nobody's going to do that. They're going to have what they need or think
No,
they
but I'm
need.
just saying, we're not limiting the number of wood stoves they can have, or wood-burning appliances at all. We're just saying they have to be EPA rated, and they can have one that is some, so let's say they want to reuse something they bought from the neighbor, or that they thought was beautiful in Paloma. And so I think we've accommodated that. I think the only place where you would likely come up with a different situation is something like Tom's, where they are completely off-grid and they're using wood for everything, and they're rebuilding, and they're trying to salvage materials from various places. So they're trying to reuse things.
This will sound like kicking the can down the road, but this could be part of the GHG reduction plan, fully thought out at that point, and
So that's what I'm thinking. I mean,
not try to deal with it now, because we're seeing there are a lot of nuances here.
for example, it is possible to create hot water by taking a barrel, putting a set of steel pipe coils in it, putting a chimney on it, building a fire in it, and it heats water just great. And then you send it to
I
a
did
tank.
lots of projects that had that in the way back.
Actually, I know of at least one that's being used now.
Yeah, I would say most people have abandoned those, but yes, it's possible. But that you still can use your wood stove to do that.
Well, this works a lot better. I'm just concerned that we have one natural source, we have one source of energy that's homegrown in this county, and that's wood. I mean, I think we ought to be encouraging people to use it.
I think we should be encouraging them to use it with an EPA rated.
But it doesn't always work for everybody, that's the problem.
Exactly why we're trying to provide an exception.
Yeah, there needs to be an exception for people that's not going to work for, because we don't want to take their source of heat away from them.
Well, we're not taking
What I'm saying is
anything away from
there
anyone.
needs to be an exception in there to provide for people that are, they need that ability to burn wood and living off the grid, that we don't lock them into something that can have them freezing in the wintertime. That's not what we're looking to do, so. So if we can put an exception in there written in a way that allows for that, I think that would be good.
So we already are allowing them wood stoves. Nobody's trying to take their wood stove. We're only trying to say they need to meet the requirements. So are you
What I
suggesting
probably would want to hear from them is I'm not that familiar with the EPA appliances. Is there something about these EPA appliances that would not work for them? That's what I would like to know.
Yes, the cost.
The cost,
If you're
okay.
trying to salvage materials, that is the issue here. You know, the vast majority of people are buying a new wood stove, but there are people who are trying to, I reused a wood stove in my house that was already there, you know, I didn't buy a new one, because it happened to already be one of those super efficient, even though it was old. So I think we're not trying to say don't burn wood, we're just trying to say if you're going to burn wood, use a more efficient appliance and try to provide an exception for the very unusual circumstances.
Could it be maybe some sort of like a hardship exception? If they can show that their situation is such that there's no way they can put that in right now, that we give them an exception, because again, we don't want to.
I think the intent of this is not for people living up country or off the grid. This is for people building down in Rancho Calaveras or downtown San Andreas or the intention is not to hobble those people who choose to live off grid. This is to, so that the neighbors don't have, I mean, I grew up on wood, love wood, but I think it's unnecessary in some of these residential neighborhood that they burn wood with dirty furnaces and dirty potbelly stoves and that kind of thing. EPA regulations need to be in that situation. However, up in the burn scar, I would not have a problem having them have an exemption that they could use wood-burning water heaters, stoves, cooking stoves, them appliances. And I do encourage, and I'm probably I'm assuming, but when the new EPAs, are they the pellet stoves or are they actual log stoves?
Both. They all both are.
Okay.
It appears to me. They talked about both pellets and logs. So it looks like we had a little bit of this discussion last time. Because we have here, except as may be provided in the housing element, was going to be our way that the housing element could address the off-grid people, could address potential burn rebuilds that have some a hardship situation. I think that's where we were kicking the can down the road to the housing element. So maybe if we limit it to EPA rated items except for one, or as may be provided in the housing element, we would leave plenty of flexibility to address this at that time.
You know, we could also add at the end of that, or off-grid construction. If
Right.
that's something that you felt was appropriate.
Yeah, I do think the off-grid folks should have an exception.
So is there consensus on that?
Let's hear one more comment from the public. She's patiently waiting back there.
Thank you. So I get the sense that the whole purpose for this is to spare the air, clean up the air. And I purposely make lots of trips with yard waste to the landfill so they can mulch it up and use it instead of lighting a match. Because I have seen how the smoke settles on houses around me. And through my work in the volunteer center and being everywhere in the county, you don't know who is struggling every moment with every breath to breathe because they have asthma or COPD or they're on oxygen or whatever. You don't know how that's impacting your neighbors, and I can tell you that it's frightening to them. And a lot of times they just have to keep their windows and doors closed and shut themselves in when they live in the country. They shouldn't have to. Anyway, so please keep that in mind, and I just think that we should have a sense of health in all policies. Every policy that we make, we should consider the health of our people. Thank you.
So it seemed like we had gotten someplace with that. Can we take a look at that after lunch, or can you reread it back to us?
So I think what I have is wood-burning appliances shall be limited in new construction to one non-EPA rated appliance per residence, except as may be provided in the housing element or off-grid construction.
So there's no requirement for EPA.
Well, if you have anything else, it has to be EPA rated.
I
It's
see.
up to you if you.
We could add a sentence that says all other appliances shall be
Yeah.
EPA rated.
I think that.
Is that?
Yeah,
Can you live with that?
I'm not in favor of it, but
And what, is there any provision about this in the current housing element?
In the current what?
Current housing element?
It's in the middle of a review.
Well, that coming up next.
Oh, okay.
Not next, but you know.
Yeah.
There is some discussion about some alternative building code requirements. It's to investigate that. I don't know the specifics of what's in those building codes, that whether or not it even addresses wood-burning appliances or not. I don't know enough about the building code to be able to answer that
It does.
question.
The Title 25, I think, which references you to portions of the building code, allows the jurisdiction to actually waive all sorts of requirements of the building code, including that you have another source of heat other than wood, which currently you have to have, but that can be waived. So it would be addressed also by that portion.
Which is what I assume you were getting at when it was proposed by the public. So I hear one vote against including this policy. How do the rest of the commissioners feel?
I'm in favor.
Commissioner Fiorino, would you like to say anything?
With the changes we made, I'm okay with it because I think we can address some of that in the housing element too further, since it does reference that. Allow other exceptions.
Lurking in all this is the fact that we all could be immediately off-grid at any point that PG&E says we are.
Exactly.
And are we okay with using the term wood-burning, I don't know why I can't say that word, wood-burning appliances? Or are we just talking about wood-burning stoves, and because we're talking about water heaters and other things? I think that appliances is probably a broader category that makes sense to keep it in there.
Yeah. But if we're meaning fireplaces to be included within the term appliances, we should say parentheses including fireplaces. Because that just isn't a natural.
I agree.
That makes sense.
Gosh, we're getting long-winded. I think we beat that
And
one
then
up.
was the other one okay? What was
Fine with me.
temporarily labeled as 5X?
Yeah.
Okay, those would be M and N at the end of the day.
So I'd go on to noise.
While we're on this page, can we talk about 5K, the odors, and the additional proposed?
And the newer wording for that.
Okay. Now, is the single-page handout that you
Yeah, just
gave us,
one,
and
the
is
title,
it,
proposed change to IMCO.
and that's different than what we got with the rest of your package, or is it the
I
same?
think this came along as an attachment to the memo we were just discussing.
it's different than
Yeah,
the
you're right.
packet.
It's different,
Right.
different than the packet. Okay, great.
I'm not sure
Is
this
it
is
out
actually
there for the
sent, this was
public to
something that
see?
we received from our outside counsel.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, so I think it was just passed out now. I don't know that
Yeah.
it's forwarded to you.
Okay.
I just have one comment, and it has to do with the last sentence. Additionally, if a proposed project includes placement of new sensitive receptors in proximity to existing sources, the applicant shall be required to provide notice. Shouldn't they also be required to include feasible measures in addition to providing notice? Because I'm imagining that if the users of it may not have much say or choice about being there in the, say it's a rehab hospital, or I'm just making things up, but just providing notice, it seems like they should actually take some active measures to protect the sensitive receptors who might be using the, yeah. Which will also hopefully reduce the likelihood of complaints.
And there may be a situation where they're trying to build next to something that produces odors. Let's just use an example like a dairy farm.
Yeah.
And how are you going to limit the odor? I mean, you can't put a dome over the new construction. So then that's why you have to notify the people, this is where we're building, it's next to a dairy farm. When the wind blows this way, it's going to stink. I mean, I think that's kind of the way it's kind of always been is, you know, you can't then build that development, tell the dairy farm, get out of here because the only way we can get rid of the smell is to kick you out.
I'm not trying to get rid of the notification. I'm just saying in addition to that, they could do things like provide filtered fresh air. I mean, there are things that
Well, yeah,
could
on
be done.
on some types of odors. But there are
Right.
some types where
That's
you're
why I
not going to be
said
able to filter it.
Fish.
I can't see a lot of dairy cows with filters on them.
No, I'm not talking about the dairy farm. I'm talking about the new project.
Okay,
If
within
you
the new
build next
project.
to a dairy farm, don't come complain. Do all the things you can do.
In the new project.
In the new project, and if you're gonna sell it to somebody, or if you
Right.
have renters or patients or
So
whatever.
you're saying they should have to
notify
try to filter
them.
out that smell.
Exactly.
So on the
Take
inside.
some personal
So
responsibility.
on the inside,
That's
it's
all
all
I'm
right.
saying.
So maybe right after provide notice, insert and take feasible measures to reduce the impacts
Yeah.
of the likelihood of exposure to substantial odors.
This is just a
I mean, there may
question.
be no way to avoid those impacts.
Right.
A dairy
Exactly.
farm, for example,
Right.
you're gonna smell it.
Exactly. There's
But-
no
But if you
perfect.
have a project, you can, I mean, the idea is that someone builds a subdivision next to a dairy farm or something like that.
Right.
The future residents need to be notified that, by the way, they have to in any way under real estate law, but this just makes it clear.
Yeah. And we provided the ER
But if it's something like
ventilation system.
a hospital, they could put in extra filtration for,
Exactly.
Right, take out
I
people.
think your language is good, Peter. Have you written it down yet?
yes, I did.
Probably
I did
just-
that first.
Just one, this is just more of a question. Because when I see terms like, it says objectionable odors that may affect substantial number of people, how is that determined? What is?
Yeah.
That's the language straight out of CEQA.
Okay.
And this
So
was
we don't know
added
how you
as a
determine
mitigation.
substantial.
So one person that says, I don't like the smell of whatever it might be, is not necessarily a CEQA impact. But if you're plugging an industrial operation that releases odors into a neighborhood, that's a
More
CEQA
substantial
impact. That's a
because it's
substantial
affecting a
number.
whole neighborhood.
And it's a judgment call.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Same
no threshold,
question.
you know, 59 people is okay, but 60 is not. You know,
Yeah.
it's something that you're gonna have to look at on a case-by-case basis when we're analyzing those future projects.
And the reason I ask that, because being in, you know, community like we're in, where, you know, houses are kind of spread out, and something comes in, a substantial impact might be 5 families, because they're on big lots, and it's affecting those 5 families. As opposed to in town, it might be, you're gonna impact, with that number of acreage, you're gonna impact a lot more people. So I just wanted to know how you determine that, so.
Have to look at it on a case-by-case.
Case by case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Commissioner Wooster, do you have any edits to this?
No, I would just, was the addition from the planning director, read and take feasible measures to avoid the impact?
I said reduce.
Reduce, okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think reduce is all we
Good.
can ask for.
No, I don't have anything.
Commissioner Henderson? Mr. Lavin?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Okay. What is next?
Noise?
Noise.
Does that take care of conservation and open space?
You sure improved things considerably. Makes sense. I still have some questions, but I'm not going to speak until spoken to.
Before we leave the conservation and open space element, since we are getting very close to the end, I believe, here, does any commissioner have any comments on the element anywhere else, not just things that we're talking about today?
No.
Does any member of the public have a specific comment about any piece of the conservation and open space element? Okay, let's talk about noise and DBA and DB and all that good stuff. I see lots of little modifications and clarifications.
So the first is 5 pages, 4 pages. We sent to our noise consultant to verify, correct the terminology that was used. And there still seems to be a bit of confusion maybe between the use of term DB and DBA, but the edits that were made were reviewed by, and these were suggested by the consultant, who clearly has an understanding of the terminology that's used. And so I'm not sure that it's fully clear to a layperson reading this, but the understanding is when we use the term DB, it depends on how it's used. When you use the term DB, it's just simply the measurement. When we measure noise, we calibrate the monitor so that it reflects it in dBA, which is attuned to human ear, human hearing. And so then when we use the term dB as it applies to thresholds and standards, we mean dBA. And I hope that's clear.
One question on that, I think you said when we're talking about LEQ, LDN, and CNEL, it says dB, but those are really dBA ratings?
Yes.
I'm just suggesting that we put a sentence in that says that, because then it makes a whole lot of other things make sense. You could do this on, may I proceed? Page N3, right after the discussion of LEQ, LDN, CNEL, and then the one sentence paragraph pursuant to state law, this general plan noise element is based on CNEL/LDN. You could put in a one sentence paragraph saying, although expressed as, quote, dB, unquote, units, LEQ, comma, LDN, and CNEL levels are measured with the A-weighted sound level, quote, dBA, unquote.
He's reading. I think he scribbled on it. I'm not sure it's any clearer to me after.
Well, I think everything would be fine except for the reference to CNEL,
Okay?
because that's a different measurement. That's a,
Just like
Yeah, but there's a,
background noise thing.
there's an explanation on page N2 that
Yeah.
above the graph, it says sound is typically measured in A weighting sound, dBA parentheses, A weighting is adjustment made to the sound meter so that the output is more closely matches how the human ear perceives sound. So I mean, it's
Yep.
kind of, that's given the explanation there.
Well, no, I'm drawing upon that explanation to explain why when they get to LEQ and LDN levels on like table N2, which also has CNEL in it, they don't say dBA, but it really is the dBA scale that they're talking about. Because otherwise, people could get the wrong impression. I think it's
On the tables, right,
On
where
the
they
table,
just say
whenever-
DB.
yeah, right.
Right.
And it all makes sense once you know, but those tables are talking about LDN, CNEL in dB. So I don't know,
Or
like
would,
table 2.
could we check with the consultant to see if the tables should just say DBA and not have to make a big explanation of it?
Table
So I think
N-1 does.
Maybe it would help to clarify that LDN, for example, is just a way that the noise level is presented, so it's a day-night average.
It's an average.
So that's what the LDN means, and then the dB is the noise level over that day-night average.
Yeah, but it's not in dB, it's really in dBA.
dBA, right, so all dB listed after that explanation of the A weighting is dBA. So,
Well, but you don't know that unless you have a sentence in there saying, when you're talking about LDN, et cetera, why it really is in dBA.
right, so the EIR chapter has this sentence, and I think it might help to add it here, after the explanation of A weighting, to say all decibels listed from here on are dBA.
That would be fine.
Okay, okay.
That would be helpful.
Because it's close together and
Yeah, no, that would be fine.
Because I have to say,
You might
it's
put it
kind
in
of put me
italics
to
and
sleep
underline it,
reading
but.
it. I just confused myself further the more I read.
No, that would be great, because that takes care of other problems that I see later on. And you're coming up with a noise contour map, Peter? Oh, I'm sorry.
yes, we're working on that now.
Yeah, okay. And so then I think the only other thing that I would have is on policy N1.1 on page N7, there's an out-of-date reference to tables noise 1 and 2, which should be tables N2 and N3.
Yeah, it was fixed on the next one down. Just missed one of them.
But if you have that clarifying sentence in there, it takes care of,
I'm sorry, still making notes on the last one. Where are we?
the policy N 1.1,
Mm-hmm.
that it's should be, the reference should be tabled to tables N-2 and N-3. And in that clarifying sentence, I think it'd be good to just really lay it out. So even though it's stated in dB, we're talking about things in the dBA range.
So in the IR, it says, all noise levels reported in this section are in terms of A-weighted levels, but are expressed as dB unless otherwise noted.
Okay. That's all I have. And it's really improved, and I thank you for going to the consultant.
Nothing on noise.
No noise from me.
Keep it quiet.
Does any member of the public have any comments on the noise element before we see it in the rear view mirror for the moment? Okay. Should we look at safety, or should we think about taking a break for lunch?
Let's think about it.
So let's all return at 1 o'clock. Is that enough time, Peter, for you? Okay. So we'll adjourn for lunch.
Great.